In 2013, a 29-year-old surfer from San Diego disappeared into the backwoods of Humboldt County, a region infamous for its outlaw cannabis trade and a grim nickname, Murder Mountain. Garret had gone north chasing fast cash in the marijuana fields. Within weeks, he vanished without a trace. Months later, a group of armed vigilantes dragged a bleeding man out of the woods, claiming he had confessed to the killing. Days after, authorities recovered a shallow grave. The man who supposedly knew its location was never charged. No one has ever stood trial. Garret's story is more than a local mystery. It's a lens into a region where fear, silence, and distrust run deeper than any investigation. Welcome to Bad Things. Join us as we trace Garret's final days, examine the theories around his death, and ask the question that still echoes in the redwoods. What most likely happened? Do you want to bring bad things with you wherever you go? Our episodes are now available as a podcast. Look us up on your favorite podcast app and listen to the most truth-seeking true crime podcast out there. When Garret Rodriguez left his San Diego home in December 2012, it wasn't on a whim. Friends say he'd been thinking about it for months, taking a break from the beach, the surfboard, and the steady rhythm of Southern California life. Like many others drawn to California's Emerald Triangle, Garret was chasing something more than adventure. He was after a payday. He'd heard about the money being made in Humboldt County, where generations of growers had turned the mountainous backwoods into one of the nation's most prolific marijuana-producing regions. By 2012, the green rush was in full swing, fueled by legal gray zones and booming demand. But it came with risk. Lawlessness, territorial disputes, and violence that often went unreported. Garret's family urged him not to go. He went anyway. He bought a white 1998 Dodge Ram and pointed it north, headed for Rancho Sequoia, a remote and highly wooded enclave near the town of Alder Point, a place long rumored to be dangerous. Locals had been calling it Murder Mountain for decades. Despite the reputation, Garret seemed excited. He called friends during the drive and invited them to spend New Year's with him up on the mountain. Katrina LeBlanc, a close friend, remembered seeing him that Christmas. He was playing adult Santa with my little girl, she said later. She loves her Uncle Gaga. That has been one of my hardest things, her asking about him. Garret settled into his new life quickly, working on a marijuana farm, trimming and possibly helping with grow operations. He stayed in touch for the first few weeks, although calls were sporadic. Call service in the hills was patchy at best. His last known communication came in early January 2013 when he called a friend from a local 707 number. He explained that it might be hard to reach him. Then he went silent. At first, friends and family didn't panic. A few days of no contact could be chalked up to the rural setting. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, concern deepened. It is really out of character for him not to contact someone, said Pamela McGinnis, Garret's mother. He always had contact with his friends. Garret would have to have contact with the people he cares about. By April 2013, it was clear something was wrong. Garret's closest circle began comparing notes and realized none of them had heard from him in months. On April 25th, his father filed a missing persons report with the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office, stating that his son had gone north to work on a cannabis farm and hadn't been heard from since early January. Deputies classified Garret as a high-risk missing person and opened an investigation. Within a few weeks, there was a break. Sort of. In late May, a tipster reported seeing a white Dodge Ram parked on private land, roughly 20 miles from Rancho Sequoia. It was Garret's truck. The family confirmed the license plate and VIN. Strangely, it showed no obvious damage. The truck wasn't running, but there were no signs of violence. No blood, no broken windows. It looked like it had simply been parked and left. Pamela McGuinness found the discovery disturbing. Someone called in when the truck was located, she said. The person who left the vehicle there is out of the area and difficult to find. For investigators, the truck offered proof that Garret had made it deep into Humboldt's interior. But it didn't bring them any closer to finding him, or to figuring out what had gone wrong. Over the summer, Garret's family brought in private investigator Chris Cook, a former Humboldt County Sheriff's Sergeant. She quickly picked up whispers that something bad had happened. These cases are becoming more and more frequent, she said. Transient marijuana workers often go missing. People in Alder Point weren't just suspicious, they were convinced. Many neighbors already thought they knew who did it. Cook fed these leads to the sheriff's department, but she grew frustrated at their pace. They did not appear to be interested, she said. No one has seen him since early January. I am 100% convinced that this is not a situation where someone is hiding out. When asked if she believed Garret was still alive, Cook paused. Probably not. I really want people to know that if you are coming up here, you could be taking your life in your hands. As summer turned into fall, the silence became deafening. Rumors swirled about a young local man in his 20s, a Rancho Sequoia resident who allegedly had a dispute with Garret and was quietly boasting about it. Tensions mounted in the community. Locals felt they knew what had happened, but nothing was being done. The suspect, they believed, was walking freely among them. Then came Thanksgiving 2013, and with it, a turning point. On the night of November 28th, a group of 8 armed Alder Point men, later known as the Alder Point 8, took matters into their own hands. Camouflaged and carrying rifles, they stormed a property where the suspected killer was staying. 2 young visitors from Indiana, who were also at the house that night, later told deputies that they were awoken by the sounds of trucks, yelling, and gunfire. When they ran downstairs, they saw the suspect bleeding from gunshot wounds and masked gunmen ordering everyone to the ground. The intruders tied the Indiana men to a tree and threatened to kill them if they talked. Then they loaded the wounded suspect into a vehicle and vanished into the night. Hours later, around 3 a.m. on November 29th, the Indiana visitors managed to untie themselves and ran to get help. Within the hour, a call came into Gerald Phelps Community Hospital in Garberville. A 25-year-old man had shown up with multiple gunshot wounds. He was the same man the vigilantes had abducted. Miraculously, he was alive and now in police custody. What happened next changed everything. Under questioning, possibly while still under the influence of painkillers, the suspect allegedly confessed to killing Garret Rodriguez and even offered to lead people to the burial site. The vigilantes claimed he'd taken them to the exact location of a shallow grave. On December 1st, 2013, acting on a tip, sheriff's deputies searched a stretch of rugged land off Jewett Ranch Road. There they found a disturbed patch of soil. Digging down, they uncovered human remains. Forensics soon confirmed the identity: Garret Rodriguez. He had been shot and buried in the woods. A young man with a surfboard and a big smile, now reduced to a name in a cold case file. To the community, the vigilantes were heroes. We know all of them, one mother told CBS News. They are all really good people. They just took it into their own hands to get Garret's body back. Others echoed the sentiment. Somebody had to go and get him. But the legal system didn't agree. The confession, if it happened, was obtained under duress. The witnesses, members of the Alder Point 8, refused to talk, fearing prosecution for their own actions. The suspect, once stable, recanted his confession and stopped cooperating. Despite Garret's body being found, no charges were ever filed. In the months that followed, tragedy struck again. On July 18, 2014, Neil Decker, one of the vigilantes involved in a Thanksgiving night raid, was shot and killed during a dispute in Alder Point. Just 4 days later, another Alder Point 8 member, Scott Johnson, was found dead by the side of the road, a gunshot wound to the head. Some said it was an accident, others weren't so sure. Later in 2017, a third vigilante associate, Bob Casper Holtzclaw, was also shot and killed, this time by a known fugitive in a separate feud. By 2018, only a few of the original 8 were still alive. For Garret's family, none of it brought closure. His aunt, Bonnie Taylor, later wrote, "Garret's alleged murderer is still at large, and the HCSO has not conducted this investigation in a way that is satisfying to the family. We do not feel that justice has been served." Years passed. The killer remained free. The sheriff's department remained silent, and Garret Rodriguez became another ghost in the Redwoods, remembered not just for how he lived, but for how his story ended in a place where justice is often just a rumor whispered among the trees. Theories. 3 paths to the truth, but only one likely leads there. In the wake of Garret Rodriguez's death, 3 competing explanations emerged, each shaped by what the people of Humboldt County chose to believe and what they feared. One theory traces a straight line through the known facts. Another suggests that what seemed like justice was a smokescreen. A third looks outward into the shadows of Murder Mountain, at the dangers that don't leave names behind. What follows is a breakdown of these theories as they have been presented by law enforcement, locals, and an ever-active online community. Each tells a different version of Garret's fate. Theory 1. The suspected local killer. The simplest and most widely accepted theory, officially and locally, is that Garret Rodriguez was killed by the man who eventually led the Alder Point 8 to his grave. This man, a 25-year-old Rancho Sequoia resident, was never publicly named by the sheriff's department, but became the central figure in community conversations. He was linked to Garret through association with the cannabis operation where Garret worked, and some sources described him as either a grower himself or someone who oversaw activity on the property. According to this theory, a conflict developed, possibly over money, paranoia, or perceived betrayal. Garret may have demanded payment or threatened to leave with information someone wanted kept quiet. Whatever the reason, the confrontation escalated into violence. Garret was shot, buried hastily in the woods, and his truck was driven away from the scene in an attempt to distance the crime from its origin. Supporters of this theory often cite the suspect's alleged confession to the vigilantes during the Thanksgiving abduction. He reportedly told them where Garret was buried, and the grave was found in that exact location. That level of detail, many believe, could only come from someone directly involved. Garret's family seems to accept this version. In a public statement, Bonnie Taylor, Garret's aunt, wrote, "Garret's alleged murderer is still at large, signaling a clear belief in the man's guilt. Even law enforcement officials, though reluctant to name names, implied the case had stalled due to lack of witness cooperation, not lack of a suspect. But there's a critical flaw. None of it holds up in court. The suspect's confession was extracted at gunpoint. He later recanted. And without the vigilantes willing to testify, the case hit a wall. The cleanest theory, legally speaking, became a dead end." Theory 2. A vigilante cover-up. In contrast to the official narrative, some online communities and amateur sleuths have floated a darker interpretation, one in which the vigilantes themselves weren't hunting Garret's killer, but hiding their own role in his death. This theory begins with a simple question. What if the confession was coerced not to find the truth, but to control it? According to this angle, one or more members of the Alder Point 8 may have had a direct role in Garret's disappearance, or at least knew more than they let on. Perhaps Garret had crossed someone powerful, either by threatening to expose something, stealing product, or being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The idea is that once Garret was gone, the group needed a scapegoat, and they found one in the young man they abducted. Proponents of this theory point to unusual social connections between the vigilantes and the alleged suspect. Some Reddit users noted that members of the Alder Point 8 were Facebook friends with individuals linked to the suspect, raising questions about how close these networks really were. Were these men truly confronting a threat, or protecting one of their own? Further fuel for this theory came with the subsequent deaths of key vigilante members. In 2014, Neil Decker and Scott Johnson, 2 of the 8, were both shot and killed within 4 days of each other. Later, Bob Casper Holtzclaw, another associate, was also murdered. While none of these deaths were formally connected to Garret's case, the rapid pattern of violent fallout led some to speculate that someone was cleaning up loose ends. "It looks a lot like someone is cleaning house," one Reddit user wrote. "Too many dead bodies, too fast." Still, this theory has its challenges. It asks us to believe that a group of 8 people murdered Garret, staged a confession, and led themselves to a grave they already knew about, then went on to publicly advocate for justice. It also assumes an unusually coordinated effort, maintained over years, with no definitive leaks or confessions. So far, no hard evidence has emerged tying the Alder Point 8 to the actual killing. Nonetheless, the cover-up theory continues to draw attention from those who distrust both law enforcement and local folk heroes, especially in a region where myth often outruns fact. Theory 3. A third-party killer. A third possibility, and perhaps the one least discussed by officials, is that someone entirely unknown killed Garret, and the person the community blamed had nothing to do with it beyond indirect knowledge. This theory relies on one core assumption: that someone else, a different grower, enforcer, or criminal operator, encountered Garret, possibly in the context of a dispute or robbery, and killed him. That person may have used the chaos and mistrust of the region to cover their tracks, and the suspect, who was later abducted by the vigilantes, may have heard rumors, been tangentially involved, or guessed at the burial site under pressure. Supporters of this theory often point to the long-standing dangers of Humboldt's unregulated marijuana economy. This was a place full of untraceable firearms, meth-fueled paranoia, and a revolving door of seasonal workers. Garret, as an outsider, could have run afoul of any number of people. There's also historical precedent. The nickname Murder Mountain wasn't invented for Garret's case. In the 1980s, a pair of serial killers operated in the same region. In 2009, another man named Robert Bobby Tennyson vanished in Rancho Sequoia and was never found. Locals have long whispered about bodies buried in the hills, shootouts over harvests, and killers who never get caught. Could Garret have been in the wrong place at the wrong time? Perhaps. Some internet sleuths even toy with the idea that a serial predator might operate in Humboldt's shadows. One local in the Netflix series mused, maybe there is a serial killer killing all these people. But this theory hits a wall when it comes to one crucial detail: the location of Garret's body. It was the abducted suspect, injured and under pressure, who led the posse to the exact burial site. That level of precision is hard to explain without direct involvement. If someone else had done it, how did this man know exactly where to dig? That question casts doubt on any theory involving a total outsider. Still, for those unwilling to trust local justice or vigilante claims, the unknown killer remains a placeholder, an explanation for a case that refuses to close. Each theory offers a different conclusion. In one, justice was obstructed by law. In another, justice was a performance to hide guilt. In the third, justice never even knew where to look. In the next section, we'll break them apart and see what holds up. What most likely happened to Garret Rodriguez. What most likely happened. A murder in the hills, a confession in the dark, and a system too broken to act. The question of who killed Garret Rodriguez doesn't need a twist ending. It doesn't require a conspiracy or a hidden mastermind. It just needs a clear-eyed look at the facts and the silence around them. From the outset, one individual was at the center of it all. The man Garret was reportedly working with in Rancho Sequoia, the same man abducted and shot by the Alder Point 8, and the only person who, according to multiple independent accounts, knew the exact location of Garret's grave. Let's start there. When law enforcement located Garret's remains in early December 2013, it wasn't because of forensic surveillance or a tip from a brave witness. It was because a badly wounded man, just hours after being abducted and threatened by armed vigilantes, led them to a remote patch of land and said, "Dig here." That location matched what private investigator Chris Cook had already reported months earlier as the rumored burial spot. But law enforcement had not acted on that tip. It was only after the vigilantes stepped in that a body was recovered. That moment, when the suspect directed the group to the grave, carries more evidentiary weight than any confession. Knowing the location of a shallow grave in the sprawling wooded chaos of Rancho Sequoia requires a level of specificity that rules out guesswork. It also undercuts the theory that he was falsely accused or framed. The grave wasn't near a trailhead or visible from a road. It was off Jewett Ranch Road, deep in rugged terrain known only to locals. If he had not been involved, how could he have known where Garret was buried? That is the fulcrum of the case. Everything else, motive, means, even witness testimony, can be disputed. But that knowledge of the grave's location is the one fact that narrows the field to one person. The most straightforward explanation. Applying Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one, we arrive at the most likely sequence of events. Sometime in late December 2012 or early January 2013, Garret had a confrontation with this individual, likely related to work, money, or suspicion. As a new face on the mountain, Garret may have been seen as a liability. He was reportedly not from the outlaw world that Rancho Sequoia operated in. He didn't know the rules, and he may have pushed for things others weren't willing to give. Maybe he wanted out. Maybe he threatened to go to the police. Maybe he asked too many questions. We don't know exactly what sparked it, but the result was clear. Garret was shot, his body was buried in a shallow grave, and his truck was deliberately moved 20 miles away to a remote spot in an attempt to disconnect him from the crime scene. The individual responsible likely assumed that in Humboldt County that would be enough. People go missing in the Triangle all the time. There are no cameras, there are no footprints in the redwood dust. And most important, there are no snitches. Chris Cook, who had decades of experience in the area, saw this pattern playing out early. "No one has seen him since early January," she said. "I am 100% convinced this is not someone who is hiding out." When asked if she believed Garret was still alive, she didn't hesitate. Probably not. Cook wasn't working off fantasy. She was following whispers. She reported that several locals had named the same suspect and described the same burial zone months before deputies responded. Her warnings went nowhere. But within Alder Point, they didn't fade. They built into rage. Why justice wasn't served. This was the rare case where everyone seemed to know what had happened, yet nothing happened. The reasons are layered, but they all point to one thing: a system that could not function in the place it was needed most. The suspect reportedly recanted his confession after arriving at the hospital, where he was treated for gunshot wounds. Given that the confession came under duress, it wasn't legally admissible. The vigilantes refused to testify because doing so would expose them to serious felony charges. Lieutenant Steve Knight of the Sheriff's Department admitted the problem bluntly. They won't come forward as witnesses. Knight also acknowledged that many residents of Rancho Sequoia were afraid to engage with law enforcement, not just because of retribution, but because of what the police might see if they arrived. Massive marijuana grows, firearms, illegal activity. They are afraid we will take it, he said. That's their living. In effect, the case collapsed not because the suspect was innocent, but because the circumstances made due process impossible. Even when the body was recovered, something the sheriff's office had not managed in nearly a year, there was no legal path to an arrest. The strongest piece of evidence was rooted in vigilante action, and the players involved weren't talking. As Garrett's aunt later put it, "We do not feel that justice has been served." What about the other theories? The alternative theories collapse under the weight of their complexity. The idea that the Alder Point 8 orchestrated the entire thing as a cover-up requires an enormous amount of coordination, misdirection, and risk, especially for a group that later spoke openly on camera about their actions. If they had been hiding their guilt, putting themselves in front of Netflix producers years later would be a strange strategy. Yes, several members of the group were later killed, but those events appear to be part of ongoing feuds and broader violence, not necessarily clean-up operations. Humboldt has always been a place where disputes turn deadly, and those who live by the gun often die by it. But none of those deaths offered proof that the vigilantes had anything to do with Garrett's disappearance. If anything, their desperation and willingness to take extreme action supports the idea that they genuinely believed they were bringing justice to light. The theory of a random or third-party killer, meanwhile, falls apart the moment you consider the burial site. If Garret had been killed by someone else, why would the suspect, who later led people to the grave, have that knowledge? Even if he had only heard rumors, the precision of the location rules out coincidence. There's also no indication from law enforcement that any other person was ever considered a suspect. In fact, the entire investigation shut down after the vigilantes' intervention, with no other leads pursued. It's not just that the suspect knew where the body was, it's that no one else did. A death in the open, a case closed in silence. What happened to Garret Rodriguez was not an elaborate scheme or an unsolvable mystery. It was a crime of proximity and impulse. An argument that turned deadly in a place with no oversight, followed by a failed attempt at concealment. The killer didn't need a plan. He just needed the confidence that no one would hold him accountable. That confidence was tested when the Alder Point 8 showed up, and for a brief moment it seemed like justice might actually emerge from the chaos. But without institutions willing or able to back it up, that moment faded. The suspect walked free, the vigilantes scattered, and the family was left with nothing but a grave and a set of what-ifs. Garret came to Humboldt looking for opportunity. What he found was a lawless corner of America where opportunity and danger share the same trailhead, and where sometimes the last thing you hear is someone telling you to shut up and dig.